What is up, fantasy fans? Welcome back to The Data Straight, a channel here on YouTube dedicated to translating real-world data into actionable fantasy insights. It's round 5 of the 2023 F1 season, and that means we're heading to the Sunshine City for our second ever outing at the Miami International Autodrome. I think it's fair to say we can expect to see a spectacle this weekend. My man Vinny D has already been spotted hanging out in the McLaren garage. Rumour is McLaren CEO Zach Brown has submitted a formal application to join the family.
I don't have friends. I got family.
Stick with me for the next 15-ish minutes because we're going to deep dive into the data and see if we can't work our way towards a lineup that brings home the big points. In my mind, the things we need to be considering are, should we be switching our DRS boost onto Perez based on his current form? Is Lance underperforming based on Fernando's results? And good God, man, the backmarker market has been blown wide open. Zhou, Yuki, K-Mag, Nico, hell, even Oscar is now looking like a viable pick. Enough talking, let's get into it. Play the intro. Okay, so the first thing we need to address is, we have a new King of the Hill. He may be P2 in the actual World Drivers' Championship, the WDC, but our man Perez, the mighty Mexican, has managed to knock his Red Bull teammate off the top spot to claim P1 in the Fantasy Drivers' Championship, aka the FDC. If you have a look on the left of your screen, you can see the current FDC standings, and Sergio is now top of the pops after he clocked a massive 61 points in Baku. Now, before anyone who backed Sergio prematurely announces themselves as the new King of England in place of old Charlie Boy, Sergio is not the first driver to score 61 points across a race weekend this year. No, Max also managed to clock 61 points in Saudi Arabia when he fought his way up the grid from P15 and finished the race in P2. Now, in last week's video, I said I was holding off on using my extra DRS boost chip for now, in hopes of a sprint race grid penalty combo that might present itself towards the tail end of the season. It might not happen, but now that we know a perfect sprint race weekend is only good enough to match a very impressive but also very doable recovery drive, it makes me think holding off was the right move for me, based on my personal risk appetite and my desire to score all the points. That being said, 61 points is currently the score to beat, so for anyone who activated their extra DRS boost on Sergio in Baku, or to anyone who used it on Max in Saudi Arabia, well done. The fantasy gods shine down upon your blessed lineups. So what does that mean for Miami? Does that mean Sergio is now the top pick for our regular DRS chip? Well, maybe. If you have a look at the top score from each race so far this season, we've got Fernando Alonso scoring 39 points in Bahrain. Then we've got Max Verstappen scoring 61 points in Saudi Arabia. Then we've got Sergio Perez scoring 52 points in Australia. And then we've got Sergio again scoring 61 points in Azerbaijan. We've only got 4 data points from which we're trying to draw a conclusion, which is not ideal. But what we can say is that a Red Bull driver has been the best pick in 75% of the races so far this season. So it's not unreasonable to say that either Max or Sergio should be getting your DRS chip this weekend. Let's run a few simulations to see if we can work it out. Of the 2 drivers, Sergio has now averaged a higher score across 4 races. Sergio is currently averaging 44 points per race. Max is only averaging 42. If you'd been using Sergio as your DRS boosted driver in all 4 races, then you'd have banked 354 points. If you'd been using Max as your DRS boosted driver, then you'd have banked 338 points, so 4.5% less. If you managed to make the right call, and you had the highest scoring driver of the 2 in all 4 races, then you'd have banked 418 points, which is 18% more than if you'd just been using Sergio. The problem, of course, is knowing when to switch in and switch out of each driver. Even if you have been 100% correct up to this point, it's going to be impossible to maintain that over the course of a 23-race season. At this point, based on the data we have, I don't think you're ever going to be a million miles off just sticking with either Max or Sergio. However, just saying, well, I think Max is going to win the World Drivers' Championship, so I'll stick with him, that doesn't work because Max is currently P1 in the WDC, but he's now P2 in the FDC. Winning races in real life does not always translate to maximum points in fantasy. Now, I'm a firm believer in trends. If I walk up to a roulette table in Vegas and I see it's hit red 3 times in a row and I have to bet, I'm betting red. I like trends. They give me a warm, fuzzy feeling in my tummy. I am going to make the swap for Miami. Sergio is the king of the streets, and the Miami International Autodrome is technically a street track in the sense that they slapped a bunch of walls up. I wouldn't be surprised if Max comes out this weekend and makes a big statement. People are now talking about if Sergio has what it takes to really challenge Max for the crown this year. And I think Max will be wanting to silence that noise with a very dominant display. But, as we've already said, winning races in real life does not always translate to maximum points in fantasy. And if backing Sergio means there is a chance I can increase my points tally by 4.5-ish%, then someone get me a lime wedge and a shot of Patron, because this weekend we drinking tequila. Okay, now I want to talk about Lance. Is Lance underperforming based on Fernando's results? That's a fairly easy question to answer, because even a quick glance at the FDC standings will tell you that yeah, kind of he is. Fernando is currently sitting in P3 on 112 points. Lance is sitting in P8 with 42 points. So Fernando is basically outscoring Lance 3-1. But does that mean you should take action? Should you be removing Lance and maybe bringing in Pierre, assuming you can find the extra 0.4 million you would need to make the transfer? Well, that's a much harder question to answer. So let's dive into the data and see what we can glean from the results scored by both drivers so far this season. As I just said, Lance has scored 42 points, so that's 10.5 points per race. Pierre has scored 44 points, so that's exactly 11 points per race. Very comparable, but a slight edge to Pierre. Lance's highest score is 21, Pierre's highest score is 20, so again, very comparable. If we say Pierre gained a 10th on Lance in Sector 1, Lance has pulled it back to even in Sector 2. Now, Lance has clocked 1 DNF so far this year, which resulted in him scoring minus 14 points, whereas Pierre has not had a DNF so far this season, which might make you think that Pierre has pulled ahead in the final sector, but it's not that simple, because Lance was running in P4 when he was asked to pull over and retire the car. If he had finished the race, he would have banked circa 20 points in Saudi, which would put his total point tally on roughly 76. That would move it up to P5 in the FDC standings. Now, you might say, well, we don't know that Lance could have held George off for another 31 laps, and to that I say, fine. Let's pretend Lance didn't race in Saudi Arabia. Let's delete his minus 14 and compare Lance over 3 races to Pierre over 4. Across Bahrain, Australia and Baku, Lance scored 56 points, which would move him up to P6 in the FDC standards, and his revised average points per race would now be 18.7 points. Even if we round down and call it 18, that means Lance's 3-race average is now 64% higher than Pierre's 4-race average. As we said earlier, Lance is also 0.4 million or 5% cheaper than Pierre, so Lance's points per pound are slightly better value than Pierre over 4 races, but they're significantly more valuable over 3 races. But what does it all mean? What is the action for you off the back of this little comparison? Well, I would say, based on the data we have at this point in the season, removing Lance in favour of Pierre is not the play. I've had Lance in my team every single week this season, and I will not be removing him for Miami. I'm not going to say how many points I think each driver will score this weekend, but I will say that by the time I come to record my next video, I do believe that Lance will have overtaken Pierre in the FDC standings. Also, for anyone thinking, hey man, are you not paying attention to Australia? Pierre crashed out of the race. Yes, he did, but it doesn't count as a DNF from a fantasy point of view. So there was no race not classified, minus 20 assigned to Pierre's point tally. Moving on to the final topic of this week's video, and essentially underlining the points I've just made about Lance, the impact of DNFs this year is catastrophic. At the top of the video, I said that the back marker market has been blown wide open, and I meant it. But before we get into the visual, I need to take a step back and make sure I set the stage correctly. In my last few videos, I've been kind of loosely referring to one particular chart as the Battle of the Back Markers chart. And on my last video, I received a couple of comments from people who pointed out that my visuals needed refining to make things clearer. So, to that end, I am officially reintroducing the Battle of the Back Markers chart as the Sub 7-8. What is the Sub 7-8? Great question. Allow me to explain. This chart, which I'll be updating and sharing each week, is tracking the results of the 8 drivers priced at 7 million or less. Each week, we'll be adding the most recent scores to the drivers who qualify for this classification into the chart. So in essence, we're tracking a league within a league. Some people, myself included, have kind of rightly or wrongly concluded that this year's fantasy format has essentially reduced the game down to just picking a back marker who's going to finish the race. Avoiding DNFs is crucial this year. Going into Baku, it's kind of just been a toss-up between Zhou and Yuki. But now, coming out of Baku, going into Miami, things are looking very different. Up to now, Zhou has been looking like an unstoppable force. But you know what happens when an unstoppable force collides with an immovable object. You get minus 10 points. K-Mag, the crafty devil, has managed to capitalise on Zhou's DNF and claim the top spot after he clocked an impressive 16 points in Baku. The other big hitter in this category has also taken a tumble. Yuki has slipped from P2 to P4 after Nico managed to bring the car home and bank 2 vitally important points. Yuki needs to watch out because Oscar also managed to bank a decent number of points, which enabled him to close the gap on Yuki with a 21-point swing. The truly sad part of this chart is the cruel downfall of Logan Sargent. Baku is notoriously difficult for rookies, and it all proved to be too much for Logan, who sadly had all 18 of his points stolen by the streets of Baku. Minus 20 for Logan, so technically all 18 and then some. It's a real shame because Logan has been a diamond in the rough this year, priced an insanely low 3.8 million, now 3.7, and adding value well beyond what you expect from his price tag. Logan has now dropped from P4 to P7, which means that after 4 races, the 2 drivers at the bottom of the FDC standings are both the Williams drivers. It's tough to say where we go from here because I think the results of Baku really surprised a lot of people. When I think about my own team, I've been triple Red Bull, triple Aston and Zhou for the last 3 races. I personally can't afford K-Mag, he's way outside my budget. Same is true for Piastri, so my options are essentially stick with Zhou or twist and go with either Nico or Yuki. I'm personally not interested in Nick because in short he scores less and costs more than Yuki, so that's not a smart move. And as much as I would love to bring Alex in, because I think he's such a talented driver, I need to see some proper signs of life from him before I can justify the transfer. Now, Nico has never raced in Miami, so I feel pretty comfortable saying I can eliminate him from contention. I've not made up my mind yet. Going into Baku, Zhou was averaging 12 points per race, now he's averaging 7. Yuki was averaging 8, now he's averaging 3. Right now, my head tells me to stick with Zhou, my heart tells me to swap to Yuki. I'll be posting my final lineup on Twitter, so follow me there if you want to see who I end up selecting, @TheDataStraight. Okay, we've covered the 3 questions I had in my mind going into Miami. Apologies for this being a slightly shorter video, although if you prefer these shorter, more focused videos, let me know. I'm choosing to leave out the driver viability matrix and the league update for this week because I want to rework both elements to make them more engaging. I have a plan, I just need to find the time to execute it. Hopefully I'll find a few hours this weekend. Best of luck with your team selection. Let's hope the fantasy gods shine down on us all. If you like what you've heard, you can tune in again next week for even more fantasy insight. But for now, peace out.